All right, we are up to chapter 46. All right. As you'll recall, the sons all arrived back in Canaan, told their dad what was going on, that Joseph was still alive. Interesting thing in all of this is what is missing in this whole story. In neither chapter 45 or 46, we don't see anywhere in here where they had to make an account of what happened to Joseph. Either Benjamin decided it was the better part of valor to keep his mouth shut, or for whatever reason Moses just didn't cover that part of the story. But I just thought that was an interesting part of the story that's not in here. No indication that they had to own up to Jacob what had happened to Joseph. But surely Benjamin knew by this point, but anyway, there's no indication that if Benjamin ratted him out, it doesn't say. Verse 1 says, so Israel, and notice again how it's referring to him. Doesn't call him Jacob, it calls him Israel, because this is part of the story of the migration to Egypt. So he's being called this as an indication that we're looking at what would be a national event. So Israel set out with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Now, where they had been living was a few miles north of there. Beersheba was considered the southern tip of Canaan. And what's particularly important about this area is not only were they about to leave the confines of what was considered Canaan and cross over pretty soon into Egyptian territory, but Beersheba is where Isaac had lived. Also, you'll recall Isaac had previously set up an altar there in Beersheba to offer sacrifices to God. There's a good possibility that Jacob may have stopped at the remnants of this altar, fixed it up, and himself offered sacrifices on it. But the interesting thing of this is, as you read through this, as we go through this story, you can still see that even at this point in his life, he spent 20 years in Haran. He's moved back and forth across the Jordan River several times. His brother is probably at this point living in what became known as Edom. And Jacob still acts as somebody that thinks he is worshiping a local deity.
He had to stop and worship God there right at the border before he got out of God's territory.
And that's exactly what's going on here. He does not want to leave Canaanite territory, not just because Canaan was the land of promise, but he still got it in his mind that I need to worship God before I leave his territory. All right, now verse 2. But notice how God speaks to him. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. By the way, this is the first time anywhere in the Bible that it's referred to this as visions. Before this, how did God speak? If God didn't speak to somebody directly, how did he speak to them?
Dreams.
Dreams. This is the first time we have the indication that he had not a dream, but a vision. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob. Jacob said, here I am. And he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. Now, it's interesting that when he says, I am God, he does not say what his name is. He just says, I'm Elohim. Which he could have identified himself as Yahweh. Why do you suppose God specifically stated, instead of calling himself by name, he just says, I'm Elohim? You think he's trying to get a message across to Jacob? Well, consider this. If Jacob is still struggling with this idea of worshiping a local god, and Jacob thinks, well, there may be other gods out there, if he identifies himself by name, all that does is simply tell Jacob, well, my God spoke to me, but he may still have in his mind that there's others out there. Give you a modern interpretation of this. If you share Christ with a Hindu, of course, how many gods do Hindus believe in?
Yeah.
Thousands. More than they probably have names for or can count. If you share Jesus with a Hindu without establishing first that there is only one God, your average Hindu will say, yeah, I believe in Jesus, I accept Jesus, but what they're really telling you is that I'll add your God Jesus to the 500,000 I already believe in. And Jesus will simply be one of all the others they worship. Which is why, without understanding what Hindus believe, a lot of Christians have witnessed to Hindus over the years thinking, oh, I led him to Christ. No, you didn't.
That's a lot of the missionaries out west had a lot of trouble with American Indians saying
All you did is just add one more to the ones they already believed. So for this reason, I think God intentionally chose not to identify himself by name, but instead just said, I am God, period. Without going into a lot of detail about it, in the sense that he would have had to set Jacob down and said, look here, Jacob, I'm it. I'm all there is. I'm actually kind of surprised over the years as to why God didn't really do that with Jacob and just appear to him and say, look here, Jacob, you've got the wrong idea about me. I am the only God. But for whatever reason, God chose not to do that. But here, he just identifies himself as I am God. This is the closest we have to God telling Jacob, I'm not just one named God out of however many others you know about. I am simply God, period.
He knew it was going to take a while for people to get that into their head. To get over the idea that there's different gods everywhere. He knew that people just weren't going to buy into I'm the only God and believe that and go on with the rest of their lives and convince other people of it right away.
You'd think,
it's
though,
going
that
to take time. It took a long time.
You would think, though, that he would have revealed this to Jacob, but whatever reason, I think this is the
Even
closest.
Jacob, who grew up,
Yeah.
Again, exposed to so many polytheistic cultures around him that it would have been too much for him.
And at this point, this is the closest we have to him saying, I'm not just a God, I am the God.
That's probably why he came to him in a vision right before he left. He knows he's with him.
But there's
it wasn't
another.
just a dream, it was a vision.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Wake up, here I am.
Yeah. But there is one thing, though, that he does do. Notice how he says this. I am God.
I was going to say that. He also said, I am. He didn't say his name, but he also said, I am.
I am. Yep, I am God. The God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. Well, and I think that's why Jacob got as far as Beersheba and figured, I got to stop and make a sacrifice here. It says, for I will make you a great nation there. Now notice at this point, the idea of a national identity has not yet materialized. In Jacob's eyes, it's still just his extended family. Because what you got is Jacob, his 3 wives. Keep in mind, we only got 3 at this point. Whatever other servants he had. 11 sons. He knows he's going to reunite with the 12th one shortly. Their wives and a whole pile of grandkids. That's it.
They aren't a nation, they're one family.
Mm-hmm.
An extended family,
Yeah,
but a family.
an extended family, which, by the way, there's some question as to the number, which we'll tackle when we get to that point. But there's about 70 of them all together. All right. Not enough to be a nation, but that's what God says, I'm going to make you a nation. I will go down with, now notice here, I will go down with you to Egypt. And I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will close your eyes. Now, by the way, this Joseph will close your eyes is a euphemism for Joseph's the one who's going to bury you.
Yeah, that's what I thought it meant.
Yeah. Well, what happens when a person dies?
Close their eyes.
Well, usually, unless they die in their sleep, most people die with their eyes open. And in fact, if any of you have ever seen, several of you in here have up close and personal recently, but before a body is embalmed, the eyes have a tendency to want to open, which is why a lot of times you'll see that people will, they'll manually close their eyes, and after a while, they'll open up again. By the way, that's also the reason why a mortician actually makes a little tiny stitch that you probably don't see, but it's there to keep their eyes closed. But that's just a natural thing. What do you do when you see a dead body? You want to close their eyes because it's just kind of, to have a person who's dead staring up at you, kind of creepy. So it's just natural tendency to want to close their eyes. So that's what he said. Joseph's the one that's going to do this. Joseph's going to bury you. But it's interesting, he doesn't tell Jacob, I am in Egypt. Notice how he phrases this.
I'll go down with you.
Yeah, so even at this point, God is kind of contributing to the, he's adding to the misconception.
He's playing along with Jacob's understanding.
And that's probably the closest we can come to it. God's not lying to him. God just knows that this is what Jacob thinks. So rather than trying to correct his understanding, God just...
Yeah, that's all he's doing.
This is where you are. So he tells him,
I'm going to go with you.
I'm going with you to Egypt.
I'm your personal God.
Yep. I am your God. And by the way, we notice that even 400 years later when they, in the Exodus, this idea still has not escaped them because how do the Ten Commandments read? He doesn't say, I am the only God. It says, you will have no other gods before me. It's several hundred years after this that they begin to get the idea that, there is only one God. And we see most of that in King David's Psalms and the things that he wrote, where David has said, that you are the only God.
And this notion that God would go with them out of Egypt and take them to Canaan and go with them was, again, an astounding thing to them. That their God would go with them.
Yep.
That's why they had the ark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but unfortunately at this point they don't have one.
The ark.
Not yet. Yeah. All right. Verse 5 says, Then Jacob arose from Beersheba. Notice, and we don't know how long this was. Probably not a long time. It just says he had a vision, which tells us he apparently hadn't even gone to sleep that night. Otherwise, it would have said probably a dream. Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob and their little ones and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. Now, why do you suppose Jacob didn't get on one of the donkeys or camels or walk like the rest of them?
He's an old man.
He's an old
He
man.
needed to ride in the wagon.
You better believe it. He's the patriarch of the family. He gets to ride. And not only that, he gets to ride on the royal wagon. Because you think Joseph sent trash wagons to go get him? I'd be willing to bet Joseph sent some really fancy wagons. Which also, notice when his boys are trying to convince him, look, Dad, Joseph's still alive. His first inclination is, I don't believe you. Until it's like, Dad, look outside. He sees this caravan of goods from Egypt, and he says, ooh, you've convinced me. That you've said enough. I believe you now. Well, what would he have had to have seen that just looking upon this caravan of goods from Egypt would have immediately convinced him they were telling the truth? Because remember what they told him about Joseph? Joseph wasn't just alive.
He was the head guy.
He was the head. He was running the country.
Rolls-Royce.
And and it would have been one thing if you walked in after. Well, first off, Jacob knows his boys had been known to lie to him before, and
He looked up through the tent flap and saw a prince's caravan.
yeah, and just to say, "Oh, Joseph's alive," that might have been one thing. They might have convinced him with that. But to tell him, by the way, Joseph he's prime minister of the country, that would have been one. He's like, yeah, okay, I was born at night, but it wasn't last night. I'm not that stupid. And they said, well, look outside, Dad. What do you see? It would have had to have been something that he would have taken one look at it and realized, you've convinced me. They were obviously royal, highly decorated wagons, and probably, now Jacob hadn't been to Egypt before, but by the way, at this point in history, caravans going back and forth from Egypt through Canaan were very common. Several a day would go past. So he probably knew what a fancy decorated royal wagon from Egypt might have looked like. And so he's convinced. But anyway, so going back to Egypt, Jacob didn't walk. He got to ride on the royal wagon. And they took their livestock and their property. By the way, notice Pharaoh told them, said, just bring your family, bring your stuff, but leave your junk behind. I'm going to provide you with stuff, everything you need when you get here. Obviously, Jacob didn't do this. Said carried their livestock and their property, which would have been probably quite a bit, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and came to Egypt, Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his grandsons with him, his daughters. Notice, daughters plural. The only daughter we know by name is Dinah. But out of that many, wives and stretched out over that period of time, our common sense tells us he had to have had more daughters than just Dinah. Well, this tells us that daughters is in the plural. We still don't know how many he had, but clearly more than just Dinah. His daughters and his granddaughters and all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. Now, these are the names of the sons of Israel. By the way, we're not going to read every single one of these.
No,
we're going to hit the highlights of all of this.
we're not going to do all the names.
We can go over the numbers, and I can read this guy begat that guy, who begat this guy, and if that's what you want.
Nope. I'm good.
What's that?
Thank you.
No names?
No Toledo.
Yeah.
Just hit the highlights.
We'd forget them anyway.
That's right.
We are going to hit the important ones, but not all of them. So these are the names of the sons of Israel, Jacob and his sons, who went to Egypt. Now, notice as we go through this, or the ones we do read, doesn't say anything about the daughters.
Nope, it's just the sons.
The only ones, and this was a cultural thing back then, which is why it's so difficult to figure out how many people were involved, not just here, but, even the feeding of the 4,000 and the 5,000 with Jesus. We know that that's in all probability the number of men, but they never counted the women and the children. They were always left out of a census. Only time they ever listed any of the women was if there was some, notable incident that occurred with them, like with Dinah.
Martha and Mary.
Yeah, I mean, Dinah got raped, and as a result of that, her brothers slaughtered an entire town. That was a noteworthy event that was, worthy of mentioning Dinah by name. But none of her sisters. We don't have a clue how many sisters she had. But these are the names of the sons of Israel, Jacob and his sons, who went to Egypt. Reuben, Jacob's firstborn. In verse 10, the sons of Simeon. 11, sons of Levi, sons of Judah. Now notice on verse 12, the sons of Judah. Er and Onan and Shelah and Perez and Zerah. It even named the two that were dead. It says, but Er and Onan died in the land of Canaan.
Those were the two. Was evil and God killed him, and Onan God killed because he refused to.
He refused to father a child for his brother.
Right. And Shelah was the only other brother at the time, right?
Yep.
And Judah didn't want to marry him to her.
Didn't want to marry him.
So the Perez and Zerah came later.
They were the twin brothers that were born from Tamar.
Tamar. Okay.
So as you're numbering, because later on it says how many there were. So obviously Er and Onan are not included in that count. This is just a genealogy saying, who all was born. Mm-hmm. Clearly they were not included in those that went to Egypt. Yeah, verse 13, the sons of Issachar. And by the way, I'm skipping going a verse at a time if you're trying to keep up. The sons of Zebulun. Verse 15, these are the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Paddan Aram, with his daughter Dinah. Notice she's even included there. All his sons and his daughters, 33 of them. And the sons of Gad.
Wait a minute. Who had 33? Is that saying that Jacob had 33 sons and daughters?
No. That's saying that all the descendants of Leah were 33.
Okay.
And when it says the sons...
Because I was going to say, that would have told us how many daughters he had. If that was
only indirectly, because notice it says when it talks about the sons, if you not count these up, you'll realize that it's not just the sons, it's also the grandkids too.
Yeah, okay, yeah. No way to
So there's no way to actually know what the count was.
Sorry, got you off track.
Then, verse 16, the sons of Gad, then the sons of Asher. These are the sons of Zilpah.
Is this also the birth order?
Yes.
Because it was at the top. I just didn't know if it kept going that when it got to Leah.
Well, partly in the birth order,
Okay.
but not entirely. Keep in mind that Leah had, I think it was 4 kids. Then she stopped bearing for a while, gave Zilpah, her handmaid, to Jacob, as a second wife.
She had 2 sons. Right?
And then she had 2. And then we're told Leah had 2 more later. So it's the birth order of
Leah.
that wife.
For Leah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But not overall. So anyway, verse 18 says, these are the sons of Zilpah whom Laban gave to his daughter Leah, and she bore to Jacob these 16 persons. So you have right there Zilpah, who only had 2 boys. We don't know how many daughters she had, but out of Leah we get a total of 16 descendants. Obviously, they didn't have TV to keep them busy at night. Then verse 19. The sons of Jacob's wife, Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. Now, notice again, it's naming all of these that supposedly made the trip to Egypt, but lists Joseph. Joseph's already in Egypt. It says, now to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, who Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. It's interesting that you see that even though Egyptians were from a different bloodline completely, there's Egyptian blood in, the Jewish race.
Yeah, because they're descendants of Ham.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So there's intermixing Ham and Shem. But then that's been going on since they started having kids.
But also, even though it is believed that part of the sons of Ham included, dark-skinned peoples of Middle and Southern Africa, Northern Africans, like the Egyptians, were kind of medium-skinned. Actually, native Jews had darker skins than the Egyptians. All right. Verse 21, the sons of Benjamin. Now, here's what's interesting. Notice how many times in the previous 2 or 3 chapters we've seen Benjamin referred to as the lad.
Yeah.
And it says the sons of Benjamin, Bela and Becher and Ashbel, Gera and Naaman, Ehi and Rosh, Mupim and Hupim. What a name.
I was looking at those.
I wonder if Mupim and Hupim were twins.
Sounds like something in a kid's book.
Don't forget ours.
Hooping and hard.
I'm going to name if I had any more kids, I'd name them Mupim and Hupim, yeah. And Ard.
A, B, and C, D.
Yeah. So that's 10 of them. That's not counting any daughters he might have had.
He's the lad.
But Benjamin's just a lad. It's, if I were Benjamin and I had, at least 10 kids, maybe 15, 16, who knows how many daughters are mixed into all this, and they kept referring to me as a lad, I think I'd take my big brother outside and say, Bud, you need to knock that garbage off.
Yeah, but there's a certain amount of the baby brother's always going to be the baby brother, and he's always going to be referred to as the baby brother, even when he's 50 years old.
Probably.
That's how it works. Trust
Yep.
me. I got 3 younger brothers, and Andrew's the baby brother, and he's always going to be my baby brother.
And that may be part of what's going on, why they keep calling him the lad,
It's
the
got to
boy.
be. It's got to
Like
be.
he's 30 years old, but he's just the boy.
Yeah, he's the baby brother.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anyway, these are the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all.
So is this where you get to 70? You're adding up these
We hadn't gotten
33s
there
and
yet.
16s?
Yeah, hold on.
All right.
But yeah, we'll get there. And the sons of Dan. Now we're to Bilhah. Sons of Dan, the sons of Naphtali.
Wait a minute, we got a Hupim and a Hushim. Cousins.
Could be.
Hupim and Hushim. They're cousins.
If you think so.
Yeah, the sons of Dan. There it is. He's got his first son. Dan's oldest son, Hushim.
All right. To verse 25, though, these are the sons of Bilhah, whom Laban gave to his daughter Rachel, and she bore these to Jacob, 7 persons in all. He wasn't quite as prolific. Of course, also keep in mind, the farther down the list we go, the younger they were. So they hadn't had a chance to be as prolific.
Not many nights without TV.
Yeah. Now, verse 26 is where we get to this. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt, his direct descendants, not including the wives of Jacob's sons, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph, who were born to him in Egypt, were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came to Egypt were 70. All right. Now, if we've got 66, we add Joseph and his 2 boys, that only adds up to 69. So where'd we get 70?
Plus, it still doesn't include the wives of the sons. That number.
No, it even says that does not include the wives.
Yeah.
So there could have been, 100 of them.
100 of them easily, yeah. If they're not including the wives in this count.
But if you're trying to make the
Who's
numbers
last
match,
person included in the 70?
well, if you're trying to make the numbers match, notice how it reads. It says, all the persons of the house of Jacob who came to Egypt were 70. So if you take 66, add Joseph and his two boys, that's 69. Well, guess who number 70 is?
Steward.
That's Jacob himself.
Jacob himself.
But if you add, it says of the house of Jacob. That's including Jacob. So that's how you get the numbers to,
You got to include the patriarch, Merrill.
you include the patriarch himself, you come up with 70.
Okay.
But again, as it just indicated, that doesn't include any of the women. So there could have been 100, 120 of them, especially if some of them's got more than one wife. A lot of people here. All right, believe it or not, we're going to finish this chapter, then we'll call it quits. Now he sent Judah before him to Joseph. Notice who Jacob sends. Not Reuben, not Simeon or Levi. Judah has now stepped up to the plate as
He's the most trustworthy son.
He is the clear the patriarch of the next generation. Reuben, Simeon, and Levi have kind of gotten pushed out because of their disobedience. You would think, though, well, if Jacob knew it was Judah's idea to sell Joseph into slavery, I'm betting Judah would be on the outs with him too. You know what this tells me? The fact that Judah is
Benjamin never ratted him out.
They never ratted him out. I don't think Joseph ever found out. And even after he met Joseph, I'm sure Joseph had forgiven him by this point. Probably did not tell them what happened. Otherwise, if he found out it was Judah's idea to sell him into slavery, yeah, Judah wouldn't, he wouldn't be in this position. But clearly Judah has emerged as the next generation patriarch.
If God wanted Judah to be the one who was to carry the line, maybe God made sure that Jacob didn't find out.
Could be. Anyway, he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out the way before him to Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen. Actually, unless they'd have turned due south, there's no way they could have missed the land of Goshen. Yeah. Because if you continue around, working your way around the Mediterranean coast, you go right through what, is called the land of Goshen. That's the swampy Nile Delta area. And by the way, maps refer to this as Lower Egypt. We always tend to think as lower being south and upper being north, but maps of Egypt have it flipped. They call southern Egypt Upper Egypt because it's an upper elevation and the Nile flows downhill. So northern Egypt is what your maps will call Lower Egypt because it's at a lower, sea level elevation.
Is that what they always say? We're coming down from Jerusalem?
Yep, same reason,
Yep.
because of the altitude.
Yeah.
All right, and Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as he appeared before him, he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a long time. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, that you are still alive." Now, all of this, that doesn't require any, that's obvious. There's no interpretation there. And Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and tell Pharaoh." Notice it says I'll go up. He's headed back south, but he's going up. Because the farther south you go, the higher the elevation. "I will go up and tell Pharaoh and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who are with me in the land of, or who are in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds." Now, beginning in verse 32 is an interesting part. This is the key to the next thing that happens. "And the men are shepherds, for they've been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. And it shall come about when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? That you shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth even until now, both we and our fathers, that you may live in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is loathsome to the Egyptians. Now, I'm going to spend the last few minutes we have explaining this whole concept. Why the Egyptians hated them, these shepherds. It is believed that this particular Pharaoh may have himself been and I think I explained this to you on Sunday night, probably was himself a foreigner who is of, Semite origin. Certainly not of Abraham's descendancy, but of that, general part of the world. I looked up the historical records of the various dynasties of Egypt, and at the time that corresponds to when Joseph would have been prime minister of Egypt, it says that there was in fact a friendly, if you can call it that, a friendly invasion of people from the north that moved into lower or northern Egypt. The native Egyptians all lived to the south of that in the middle and southern part of what we now see as Egypt on the map. And since they had stayed to the north, the Egyptians really didn't care that those people were there. They didn't have any problems with them. But as those northern Semitic people began to multiply, after a few decades, they outnumbered the native Egyptians, and there was not really a civil war. It was pretty much just a political takeover that there was so many of them, the native Egyptians couldn't really do anything about it. Well, why did the Egyptians despise shepherds? Because that's what all of these people from the north were. And native Egyptians didn't eat, steaks. They would eat lamb, pork, things of that sort, but they considered cows to be among their sacred animals. And they didn't eat that kind of meat, which is, again, kind of gives you an idea of why Pharaoh's dream included cattle. But anyway, the Pharaoh at this particular time is believed to have been of that bloodline, but the other Egyptians did not like these shepherd people because they were living under the rule of these shepherds from the north. So they learned to despise them, which when a few generations went by, and finally the native Egyptians were able to throw off the rule of these invaders from the north, they enslaved the Hebrews at that point because they were from that same area and they were shepherds and keepers of livestock, which the native Egyptians despised them. Well, now, why that comes into play at this point is because Pharaoh had enough common sense not to let them go farther south and mixed with the native Egyptians. He wanted to keep these shepherds and keepers of livestock farther to the north to keep the population separate. Joseph knew that would happen from the beginning, which is why he told them, I'm going to settle you in Goshen, and when you meet Pharaoh, tell him that you're a shepherd. Pharaoh's not apparently going to be offended by this, but the rest of the Egyptians will be. They absolutely loathe shepherds. So, knowing that up front, Joseph basically orchestrated all of this, knowing that when they were introduced to Pharaoh, Pharaoh would give them that pasture land to the north to keep them separate. Joseph basically played both ends against the middle.
But it was also the breadbasket. It was also the most fertile land.
And that was true too. But guess who gets to do the farming in a land like that?
The slaves.
The slaves. So that was okay with the Egyptians. They didn't care. That slave, as far as they were concerned, that's slave land. Real Egyptians don't live there. That's the other side of the railroad tracks.
I'm still very blown away by how this Pharaoh is just, and he's bending over backwards for one. I mean, it's just.
Which again is why it's
incredible.
believed that
Yeah,
he
it
may
has
have been a
Very-
distant blood relative of
Yeah.
these Abrahamic peoples.
Had to be, that's-
And again, like I pointed out the other night, that very point in history that a pharaoh of Semitic origin would be in place at that point in time. I mean, that's God doing that.
Mhm.
You know, that's Him orchestrating things.
And even to fulfill prophecy for a pharaoh to arise later who wasn't of that bloodline, who decided we can't have any more of these people in our land. Let's make slaves out of them. Anyway, questions this evening? All right.